We're in the dog days of summer, and we are discussing anything and everything out there about the Boston Bruins.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Tuesday, July 15th. Thank you so much for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's episode, we are going to touch on a whole bunch of things that are out there with respect to our Boston Bruins right now. First, we're going to touch on yesterday's topic, which was Don Cherry and Bobby Orr coming out and defending him with the recent goings-on between Cherry and his former partner, Ron MacLean. We're going to discuss Jakub Voracek endorsing David Pastrnak for the captaincy. We got a numbers trade, prospect games announced, prospect rankings, and also some Michael DiPietro noise out there with respect to him potentially having to go on waivers. Before we get into all that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. That's on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, TikTok. You can find me, my hockey thoughts and dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I've been covering this team and the NHL for various outlets for almost 20 years now. So on yesterday's episode, in case you missed it, we discussed Don Cherry's complicated legacy, which began as head coach of the Boston Bruins in the 1970s. Pretty successful run as head coach. If he were to have that kind of success today, he would be lauded as an incredible hire. 4 division titles, 2 Stanley Cup final appearances, Jack Adams, and of course it all came crashing down thanks to a too many men penalty in the semifinals against the Montreal Canadiens, after which he was let go. He had one more season with Colorado, who later became the New Jersey Devils, and then began his illustrious, infamous broadcasting career with the CBC up here in Canada with Coach's Corner. Now, why is Don Cherry in the news this week? Well, it all started with a profile on Ron MacLean in a newspaper in Kingston, which is roughly between Ottawa and Toronto here, if you're driving on Canada's biggest highway. Now, in that profile, Ron MacLean basically said that Don Cherry was ill during the 2019 Stanley Cup final and had to be hospitalized with pneumonia. And MacLean said the pneumonia said to Don, it's time. He had to think, why is this grind so suddenly hard? He was ready to have an exit strategy. And from that moment on, he was plotting a way out. The first opportunity to end Coach's Corner was going to be a happy one for Don, and I thought he did it well, end quote. That was from Ron MacLean. Now, Cherry later came out and said he was not in a Boston hospital during the 2019 Cup final, did not miss time on the show that season or the beginning of next, and did not orchestrate his exit. In fact, he told the Toronto Sun he felt Sportsnet management was looking for a way to move him along for quite some time. So he was upset with Ron MacLean for talking about Cherry's health publicly and for suggesting that he wanted out of Coach's Corner and that his departure was an elaborate exit strategy. Cherry said he was disappointed with MacLean, that he would talk openly about someone else's health, and that he was not welcome at his home anymore. As it turned out, MacLean did go to his home in the last couple of days, and that he apologized to Cherry for publicly talking about his health and also for saying that he had this exit strategy. Whether it worked or not, I don't know if they're going to have a relationship again. Don Cherry told the Toronto Sun that he didn't have any feelings either way for MacLean anymore, and that did not change after the apology. And obviously, there's some work to do by MacLean to repair the relationship. Now, this all, of course, came to a head during what we've affectionately referred to up here as Poppygate. And that, of course, was on November 9th, I believe, 2019. So just a few months after the alleged hospitalization during the Stanley Cup final. And it was that night that Don Cherry went on a bit of a rant about immigrants not wearing poppies in Canada on Remembrance Day. And poppies, of course, something that we wear up here on Remembrance Day, where we remember the sacrifices made by veterans during the World War specifically. And the poppy is a symbol of the famous poem written by John McCrae, In Flanders Fields. Cherry at that time said, I was talking to a veteran. I said, I'm not going to run the poppy thing anymore because what's the sense? He lives in Mississauga. Very few people wear a poppy, Cherry said. In downtown, forget it. Downtown Toronto, nobody wears a poppy. And he continued by saying, you people love, they come here, whatever it is, you love your way of life. You love our milk and honey. At least you can pay a couple of bucks for poppies or something like that. Basically, he didn't come right out and say it, but basically the insinuation was immigrants come to Canada, they enjoy the way of life, but they don't cough up a couple bucks to honor those who helped create this country to be what it is. Like the land, a free country, basically. At the time, MacLean was kind of nodding to Cherry's comments, giving him a thumbs up. And then the next day, he said that during last night's broadcast, Don made comments that were hurtful and prejudiced, and I wished I had handled myself differently. It was a divisive moment. I'm truly upset with myself for allowing it. I've worked with Don for 30 years. We both love hockey, but that last night, I know we failed you. So kind of Ron MacLean throwing Don Cherry under the bus. The NHL criticized Cherry, saying hockey's at its best when it brings people together. The comments made last night were offensive and contrary to the values we believe in. Sportsnet on November 11th came out and fired him, basically. And MacLean, again, just a few days ago, came out and said that he thought Cherry was strategic in those comments, saying that he wanted an out because of recent health scares or situations, specifically pneumonia during the 2019 Stanley Cup final. MacLean said the attack on immigrants was improper. He was not happy with it, goes against his ethics. He was able to take his stand later on, and he was also playing the game, and that card allowed Don gracefully to get out. He could go out on what for him was a high, saying stuff that would get you elected president of the U.S. now. Which kind of brings us to Bobby Orr. Because following MacLean's comments, Bobby Orr wrote a letter to the editor in the Toronto Sun. Of course, Orr played for Cherry in Boston. They have become good friends since, and Cherry regularly pumped Orr's tires as the best hockey player of all time on Coach's Corner. And Orr, who, this isn't the first time he's taken up space in a newspaper to defend a friend or to endorse someone, said, suggesting Don Cherry used encouraging people to wear poppies on Remembrance Day as an exit strategy from Coach's Corner, revealing he had pneumonia in 2019 and that he doesn't have many friends. I only have one thing to say to you, Ron MacLean. Shame on you. End quote. So Don Cherry being defended by former defenseman Bobby Orr once again in light of these comments made by Ron MacLean. Again, not the first time Orr has taken out space in a newspaper to defend a friend, endorse someone, perhaps with unpopular opinions. And so the story goes on, and we'll see if, again, Don Cherry ends up in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and if this story has any more legs. But found it interesting that Orr would take the time to write to the Toronto Sun, call out Ron MacLean, defend his friend, Don Cherry, and kind of, I don't know how you would say it, but kind of put it in the context of encouraging people to wear poppies rather than calling out you people for not wearing poppies on Remembrance Day. Anyways, just wanted to give that quick update on that story. We're going to touch on a few other Boston Bruins news and notes that are traveling around the internet here as the podcast continues. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride on the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Just open the FanDuel app or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's continue by touching on a few Bruins-related news and notes that are going around right now. And apparently, Jakub Voracek is a big endorser of our boy David Pastrnak for being the next captain of the Boston Bruins. On Monday, Bar Down, which is a TSN product, tweeted out or X'd out, name one NHL player that has never been an NHL captain that deserves to wear the C at some point. And Voracek, at JACHOBE, responded with bleepin' Pastrnak. Now, of course, Pastrnak is one of the leading candidates to be the next captain of the Boston Bruins. He makes it sound like this is well overdue, but the reality is there hasn't been much opportunity for David Pastrnak to be the captain of the Boston Bruins, with Zdeno Chara being around, followed by Patrice Bergeron, and then, of course, you had the C given to Brad Marchand for the past couple of seasons. But Voracek clearly thinks that he should be the next captain. The candidates likely reserved to Pastrnak, Charlie McAvoy. I can't see anybody else being named captain at this point. Pastrnak, I think, is the guy, although there's a certain case to be made for McAvoy. Perhaps we'll talk about that on a future podcast. Now, Pastrňák, Voracek, fellow Czech players who have trained together, competed together in national team camps and games. They've also been involved in charity events together, serving as captains of opposing teams in an annual all-star charity game in Praha. And, their relationship is obviously deeper than just hockey. And, of course, Voracek would love to see a Czech player being named captain of an NHL team. Now, if and when Pastrňák becomes the captain of the Boston Bruins, he would be the 7th Czech player to hold captaincy in the NHL, following in the footsteps of Peter Stastny, who was captain of the Quebec Nordiques, Jaromír Jágr, who wore the C for the Pittsburgh Penguins and the New York Rangers, Patrick Elias, who was captain of the New Jersey Devils, Milan Hajduk with the Colorado Avalanche, and most recently, Radko Gudas, who is the captain of the Anaheim Ducks. So Pastrňák clearly getting an endorsement here from our boy, Jakub Voracek. Why did I say our boy? I don't know. He's not our boy, but hey, good on him for endorsing Pasta. Now, speaking of big announcements, the Bruins made a bit of a stir on social media on Monday by posting trade alert with 2 red lights around it. It was not an actual trade, but it was a number swap. Sean Kuraly will wear number 52, which was previously worn by Andrew Peeke, and terms of the deal were not disclosed. Typically, this is a cash transaction or a watch or something like that. So, whereas we thought perhaps the Bruins were making an actual trade, it ended up just being a jersey swap. And then they announced a few other new jersey numbers coming at you, quote unquote, calmly this time, as again, it caused a bit of a stir. Now, it was revealed that Victor Arvidsson would be wearing number 71. That, of course, has been worn recently. Oliver Wahlstrom wore it this past season, while Taylor Hall rocked 71 for the Bruins for a couple years. It was also worn by Marc Savard for one season back in 2007. Blumel is going to wear number 13. That was worn, of course, by Charlie Coyle over the last 6 seasons. The next number announced was Michael Eyssimont, who's going to wear number 81 for the Boston Bruins. It's only been worn 4 times, most recently by Dmitry Orlov. Anton Bleed wore it before, Miroslav Shatan, and then, of course, Phil Kessel. Jordan Harris will wear number 43. It's been worn by 15 players. Frederic Brunet wore it this past season, and Danton Heinen wore it as well. So Brunet, if he makes an NHL appearance, will have to get a new number. Tanner Jeannot will rock number 84. It's only been worn once in Bruins history by Jared Tenorti in 2021. Victor Soderstrom will wear number 29. Used to be reserved for goaltenders. Felix Potvin wore it, but it was worn by Parker Wotherspoon. Most recently, Felix Potvin did wear it back in the day, which reminded me of the goalies. And then Alex Steeves will wear number 21 for the Boston Bruins, which was worn most recently by James Van Riemsdyk in 2024. Nick Ritchie wore it. If you did not listen to the Who Wore It Best series, I did that a few years ago, went through each of the numbers for the Boston Bruins, so go back and check that out. A couple other things to touch on here with respect to our Boston Bruins, including Michael DiPietro making some noise out there, or some noise surrounding him, as well as prospect games were announced, and a prospect rankings list from The Athletic. We'll touch on all that here as the podcast continues. Let's say you just realized that your business needs to hire someone like yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Well, it's easy. All you have to do is use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is really all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. I've been in that spot where a company I worked for needed to find the right hire ASAP. The pressure was on. Every day without the right person was a setback. That's exactly where Indeed's sponsored jobs came in handy. They made sure your post was seen by the right candidates right away. You can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Boston Bruins. Terms and conditions apply, but if you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. All right, let's touch briefly on Michael DiPietro before we get to some prospect rankings and games that were announced. Michael DiPietro was the best goalie in the AHL last season, and he was re-signed and will try to beat out Joonas Korpisalo for the backup role with Jeremy Swayman this upcoming season. Swayman, of course, is the number one highest paid goalie, hoping to get back to elite status, and the competition is between DiPietro and Korpisalo for the right to be his backup. Korpisalo was unhappy with the amount of playing time he had last season, will make a push for more, while DiPietro is hoping to prove he can make it at the next level. What the Bruins might face is a situation where they have to put one of these guys on waivers in order to send them to the AHL. And Jeff Marek, on his cheat show on Monday, suggested that the Edmonton Oilers would be keen on claiming DiPietro if he was indeed put on waivers. Now, for me, the Bruins would probably desire more to get rid of Korpisalo's contract by putting him on waivers or moving him over the summer while allowing DiPietro to claim the backup spot at a much cheaper rate. I would be shocked if the Bruins just put DiPietro on waivers and risked losing him for nothing after going through the process of re-signing him. And DiPietro must see a path to the NHL in Boston, while the Bruins, if they're going to risk losing him for nothing, could have just put him on or just not signed him to begin with. So while Jeff Marek is quite right in suggesting that the Oilers or several other NHL teams would be interested in him if he were to be put on waivers, I don't see the Bruins risking that. Probably much more likely that they try to jettison Korpisalo via trade or on waivers, or they try to trade DiPietro in order to get some sort of value out of him. So that's the latest on him. Now, we have some prospect challenge news here. As the Bruins announced on Monday, the team will play a couple games in Buffalo this upcoming September at the Prospects Challenge. They'll be joined by prospects from the Buffalo Sabres, Columbus Blue Jackets, New Jersey Devils, and Pittsburgh Penguins, and they'll play 2 games throughout the event, which is kind of light considering there's 5 teams there. They'll play Friday, September 12th against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and then Sunday, September 14th against the New Jersey Devils. So if you're in and around Buffalo that weekend, try to check out some Bruins prospect action. Now, speaking of prospects, Scott Wheeler of The Athletic posted his top 100 drafted NHL prospects rankings. And it's a 2-part, twice-a-year project, which ranks the league's top 100 drafted skaters. And to be considered a prospect, you must be under 23, not fully established with their NHL club. Now, the Bruins only had 2 players on this list. You have to go all the way down to 88 out of 100 to find Matt Pastrňák, who is a tier 5 prospect. Wheeler says there's lots to like about Pastrňák. He was viewed as an above average playmaker, athlete, overall player whose game was projectable, made it to the NHL at an early age, but had some growing pains, an injury, and a clearly defined role that he needs to latch onto. His time in the AHL last season was positive, and Wheeler says there's still reason to believe he can become a middle 6 PP2 forward who can produce 40 to 50 points. Doesn't have dynamic quality, but is a heady, intelligent player who still projects as a good, long-time NHLer. Wheeler added, he has never inspired me, though, which is not a great way to end it. Then you go all the way up to number 8 to find James Hagens. Hagens, he writes, profiles as a top of the lineup, play creating center in the NHL with a similar profile to Utah's Logan Cooley. Wheeler remains a big believer in him and his game and expects him to be one of the top forwards in college hockey as a sophomore and outperform his draft slot in his career. Again, the Bruins were so lucky that Hagens dropped to number 7th overall. From this 2025 draft, only 2 players are ahead of him in Wheeler's rankings, and that includes Matthew Schaefer at number 1 and then Michael Misa at number 2. Would have been great if the Bruins jumped up to get Misa, but according to Wheeler, they have the next best thing in James Hagens. Porter Martone coming in 9th on this list, and Caleb Desnoyers, Anton Frondel coming in 11th and 12th. There was a lot of noise around Jake O'Brien and Brady Martin. You have to go down to 20 and 22 to find those two. So the Bruins did very well to get our boy James Hagens there with the 7th overall pick. All right, that's it for today's episode. A lot of random news and notes with respect to our team. Got some bigger stuff planned for the rest of July here on the podcast. Hopefully a couple guests, the latest on the Boston Bruins. Keeping it daily here until the last week where I'll be going on a bit of a break for a trailer week with our boys. Anyways, please do check out the Locked On NHL podcast next, all the latest from around the league. You can also find, Locked On Bruins on your podcast app and on YouTube, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please do take care of yourselves, friends. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.